This week's episode of our show is sponsored by Beadle & Grimm's new Game Master's Journal.
If there's two things that can make you a better GM, it's keeping better notes and reading more books. So what better way to do that than with a book of notes?
Although I use a lot of digital tools even for my in-person games, I still take a ton of handwritten notes when I'm running the game. Beadle & Grimm's has put together an absolutely gorgeous Game Master's Journal that you can use both at the table during the game and when you're preparing between sessions or reflecting on how last night's game went.
This book contains over 200 pages with different headings for places to keep notes on NPCs, adventure design, magic items, and everything else that you might need in your campaign. Each time you finish up your game, you can open up your book and pop down all the important information into the right sections for easy access to prepare for your next game.
My favorite section is the fantastic session log, which lets you keep an accurate account from game to game of all your player characters' heroism, cowardice, or both. You can even choose the cover art that speaks to your personality, the way that you run your game, or the theme of your campaign.
So follow the links below to check out Beadle & Grimm's Game Master Journal. And now, on to this week's episode.
Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything D&D, including advice for players and guides for Dungeon Masters, as well as a review of the Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves movie,
which we just recently saw. We upload new videos on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and ring that bell so that you never miss an episode.
Today, we are diving into our in-depth review of Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves.
We're going to be doing this review in two separate parts. So the first section of this review is going to be our spoiler-free look at how we enjoyed the movie. And then afterwards, we're going to do a deep dive with much more spoilers, looking at all of the things we liked and some of the things that we didn't like about Honor Among Thieves, the Dungeons & Dragons movie. But before we get started, we are also joined today by two of our very good friends.
I'm Jill Denitis.
And I'm Joe O'Gorman. Now, if you've already seen the movie and you're not worried about spoilers, skip ahead to the time code in the description below. Otherwise, stay tuned for some really great information about, I think, a really great movie.
We've got a lot to talk about today,
so let's get rolling.
The first part of this review is going to be spoiler-free, but past that point, there's going to be lots of spoilers ahead. We'll give you one more warning before we hit there, but just so you know.
So we saw Honor Among Thieves all together at our local VIP cinema and had a wonderful night on opening night together checking out the movie. I think that pretty much everyone in the theater was there with their party.
We were there with our full party, which took up a large part of the theater, which, but overall it was, I think, a really fun movie. And that's the word that I want to use to describe it, mostly, is fun.
Overall, the movie was really well done. I don't think you had to know a lot about D&D to enjoy the movie. I didn't think they over or under explained things. I think it was really well paced. Overall, yeah, I was really impressed.
Yeah, there was a lot of great laughs. Overall, you know, when we were diving in, it felt like we were in a D&D campaign, which is really inviting. Yeah. And for those who either love D&D or have never seen it before, it was a great way to dive into the world.
I think that from like a film standpoint, it's very approachable. It's really, even if you are a huge D&D fan or you're not, you're going to enjoy the movie. There's nothing overly complicated here. But for those of you who are D&D fans, there's a lot of Easter eggs, and it's really fun to be able to call out like, oh, I know what spell they're casting. Oh, I know what that monster is. But it's also a great entry point, I think, for people who are looking to get into D&D. This gives you the kind of baseline of everything you would expect in a D&D campaign.
For myself, this was a wonderful and entertaining popcorn flick that really resonated with the same vibes as some of my favorite movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and The Princess Bride. If you enjoyed those movies, you will find that there is a lot to love about Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. It really feels like in the same tradition as those films. However, it is not as good as either, but it is still an excellent and enjoyable evening out at the theater, or a wonderful movie to just pop on once it comes to streaming services and just enjoy it with some friends and some popcorn.
I think just to add to that point, it does feel like the kind of movie that you're not winning any Oscars here. Nobody's winning Best Actor. Don't go into it expecting a really deep story.
Although there is a lot of humor and quippy dialogue, it doesn't descend into the really hokey and really played out style of quip humor that we see from a lot of modern movies, especially some of the not as strong Marvel movies. This definitely sits among, if you were to classify it as a Marvel movie, because it feels like it's of the same DNA, just fantasy. It feels like one of the better Marvel movies. I would put it on par with the Avengers.
Yeah. There's definitely like an adventure theme to it. They have a very clear like goal that they have to achieve. They go out to achieve that goal, and there's just like a lot of fun along the way. And it's not, and they don't repeat things too much. I think that we got to explore a few different veins that were interesting in that D&D world, where you didn't feel too bogged down.
There is an element, though, of a bit of predictability, right? There is a sense where it's not anything that we didn't necessarily know that was going to be there, but like we said, the quips, the humor along the way, and the adventure style of it really bring a freshness to this kind of style, too.
This movie is very much a fun romp. It is not like an epic like The Lord of the Rings. The violence is not graphic by any stretch of the imagination, and while there is a little bit of language, it's certainly nothing that you couldn't bring your kids or your grandma or your mom to, and they wouldn't have a good time watching it or understand what's going on.
I think by all means, this is a movie that is worth going to see in theaters, or if you miss it in theaters, worth checking out when it's available at least once. It's a movie that I'm probably going to watch a few more times just because I love the world. I love everything that it offers me as a huge fan of D&D. And also, this is the kind of movie that I might actually show to my parents who have never played D&D and say, hey guys, if you want to see kind of the world and setting that my game takes place in, check out this movie. It's a lot of fun. My parents have watched Marvel movies before. They think they're fun.
And on that, I do think that it is a wonderful film that if you have geeky friends that haven't got into Dungeons and Dragons yet, I think that it is a movie that you can watch together and say, hey, did you like that? Because it has a lot of the vibes of a fun beer and pretzels style Dungeons and Dragons game. If your style of playing D&D is your friends getting together, having a good time, telling a story that's got a little bit of heart and a lot of antics to it, this really captures that essence of a D&D campaign. This movie doesn't take after, say, Curse of Strahd or the war-based campaigns like Red Hand of Doom. It's considerably more lighthearted than that, but it feels really at home with many of the heist-themed campaigns. I felt like there was a lot that resonated with, say, Waterdeep Dragon Heist in this film. And so, in that respect, I think you can use it to convince people to play D&D that like that style of film.
I think from there, as we start looking at some of the more spoiler-heavy options, which this is now the cutoff point. If you are still watching, we are about to start talking a little deeper about this movie, and we're going to start name-dropping, talking about specific scenes and specific moments. So if you haven't seen the movie, now's where you should stop the episode.
We'll see you next time. Come back when you watch the movie, and we'd love to share our thoughts with you. Bye. Okay, are they gone? We can actually talk about this now.
Yeah, okay, so let's actually get into it. So,
because I have thoughts.
Overall, I think that this was, exactly like we said, a really fun, excellent movie.
Yeah.
But there are a few things that I do want to talk about specifically in this movie.
Let's start off with being positive. Let's continue the positivity, because I will preface my gripes with this film are gripes. And I definitely find myself in the mode of, should I evaluate this as a film or should I evaluate it as a D&D movie? Because those are different grades. That's a different ranking criteria.
Definitely a different way of looking at it, right? And there are two perspectives of how you can look at this film, whether you're looking at it from a D&D game perspective, from behind the scenes, or you're looking at it as a movie in itself.
Yes.
I do personally think that a lot of the predictability actually shines much more when put through the lens of if this was a D&D campaign. Because let's be real, all D&D campaigns fit into tropes. We play with relatively generic concepts with the posing the question to the players of what are you going to do in this well-known concept. And although the movie is a movie and so it falls into a lot of those cliches, there were moments where I'd be like, oh, that's a great moment to put in front of a player character, or, oh, that's a great trope to drive an adventure forward. And so when you are looking at it as a D&D movie, as a D&D player, there's a lot more to love that kind of glosses over the fact that it's mildly predictable.
Well, the film, first and foremost, it does not take any time to explain the way magic works. It takes that all for granted. So one of the things that the film doesn't do, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, is that it jumps right into the story. It doesn't worry about explaining, hey, this is the Forgotten Realms. It doesn't worry about explaining, hey, this is the way magic works in this setting. It doesn't take any time. It just rockets us right into getting to know the characters, and it wastes no time in bringing us into that action and bringing us into the story, and very quickly whisks us from delightful set piece to delightful set piece with a few moments of emotional role-playing scenes interjected here and there. And in that respect, it's kind of like, here's the combat scene, here's the skill challenge, here's the role-playing scene, here's the combat, skill challenge, role-playing, and brings you right through that.
There is something lovely about, as being a D&D player, seeing those elements and being able to identify them, though. Yeah. So right from the very beginning, he starts out saying, this is my backstory.
Yes.
And you're able to like hone right in on, oh yes, this is the first session of this campaign, and diving into those pieces, getting into those really emotional times where they're telling their story, a role play moment.
And that's where, even that beginning scene where Chris Pine is explaining his character backstory, I immediately recognized as a D&D player, oh, this is the gag. Like, this is the bard telling their backstory to stall for time. I will say, from a cinematic perspective and evaluating it as a film, even though it has the excuse of doing that as the D&D movie, it still was an exposition dump at the beginning of the movie.
But it was an exposition dump with a punchline because he kept stalling for, what was the Aarakocra?
Jonathan?
Jarnathan!
He kept stalling for Jarnathan, and then when Jarnathan shows up, the hilarious... I know what you're saying, but I was sold the moment they smash out the window and the one guy's like, but we were going to pardon you.
Yeah.
And like, I was like, this movie's amazing.
It worked. Like, overall, it was one of those things where I was just like, is this my favorite way to get into a movie? No, but it got me in.
I will also say that right off the bat with Easter eggs in this movie, for those of you who are D&D fans, even in the opening shot, as we pan through the prison, and in one of the cells we see UNT.
Yes.
And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, we're in. Like,
and we see the
here.
Aarakocra.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, you actually don't know they mentioned that Jarnathan is an Aarakocra, but that only occurs to you if you're a D&D person that, oh, an Aarakocra can fly. And so you wouldn't realize that was important unless you were a D&D player. So that's an example of those Easter eggs where, like, I think you're right, Jill, where because they mention some things by name, you're like, oh, that's what this is going to be building to. You recognize that away. And that's delightful, actually, in that respect.
My favorite scene in the movie has to be, because we want to keep the positivity going, the scene where Michelle Rodriguez reunites with her ex-lover, and they have the juxtaposition of the like the towering barbarian and the halfling, and the halfling played by Bradley Cooper is just incredible.
I lost it at that scene. It was so charmingly funny.
Yeah, and it played on this gag of like, but like, you know, you sort of forget sometimes, especially in, you know, I think when we play, Monty, you do such a great job of describing things, but there's still that, sometimes you sort of forget the scale of things. Yeah. There's like this visual part, and just when he reaches out his hand and it's like a baby hand and to touch her, and she's got this giant hand. It's just, it's gold, man. It's such a fun, like, way to, like, yeah, like they're just two people in this world that had a relationship.
I found that was both a really funny moment, but also had a really rooted heart. I was feeling
What they were saying, like their conversation was very
they did sight gags with heartfelt dialogue, because Michelle Rodriguez walks into the house and there's a halfling, Bradley Cooper, just being like, "Oh, hey, dear,"
and he's bringing over like the tea, and they're giant, like it's like a giant tea thing, and
Just,
like the armchair he's sitting in, he's like.
Just all sight gags. But then, when it got to the meat of it, these two loved each other, and
he was hurt. He was hurt by her
because
the way
she couldn't stop drinking. And was just a reckless
barbarian.
Yeah.
What about you, Jill? What was your favorite moment or scene?
Honestly, there's this element where the action scenes where the druid is shape changing to get away from a scene. I thought it was a really interesting way to have a perspective, but at the same time show the amazing magical abilities that are happening within this setting.
I think the wild shape infiltration scene and the escape. First of all, I felt justified in that druids are indeed the best infiltrators in the game, and the movie completely, it was unambiguous why turning into a fly to sneak in. But that was a delightful chase sequence.
Yeah, and in a movie like this, I think one thing that I do want to say is we need to be willing to forgive film narratives from straying from the source material a little bit. Yeah, we were all looking for rules, but really, when we're looking for rules, I'm looking for spells that I know the name of, what action are they using in combat, which characters using what skill or ability. What I don't care about is, can a druid change into an owlbear? A druid can't wild shape 5 times.
Yeah, what's her level? What's her
I don't care. Let her wild shape 5 times in a row, because it was really, really cool. And I even felt my D&D brain in that moment. As soon as she did the 3rd transformation, I'm like, you can't do that. And then she kept changing, and I was like, I don't care. This is great. This is so good.
The film had some wonderful chase-style sequences, and the druid wild-shaped chase in Neverwinter was excellent, but so was Thundershot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Thumbershod, the dragon, which a fat dragon, first of all, is just a cool thing to see in cinema, and to see that character in animated. The animation was very well done, the CGI for that. And the whole escape sequence really was exciting and charming.
Did anybody else... This dragon should be terrifying. I found him adorable. He's barreling around, being this chonky boy, just trying to get up on things, being oh god, this is... And I just was this is so endearing.
But not even barrel. He would roll around to get around.
Yeah. It's interesting. I almost wish that his hoard had been food. He just had food everywhere. But that was probably one of my favorite scenes.
Yeah.
I also actually, a small scene, but for me, really was one of the early scenes that drove home character build. So the scene where Michelle Rodriguez's barbarian character, Holga, and Chris Pine as Edgin are about to get their heads chopped off, and then Holga just does the whole barbarian thing and grabs the brick, blocks it, starts smashing people, and then it keeps cutting back to Chris Pine just going shh, shh, and he's we're getting them now, and I'm like, Bard and a Barbarian, this is the most iconic combat sequence I can imagine for a Bard and a Barbarian. The Barbarian's doing all the work, smashing people into walls, throwing them across the whole alley. People are just flying everywhere, and then the Bard's gotta get out of these cuffs. I can't just break out because they're not strong.
But you can imagine that he was rolling low, behind the scenes at the table. He's not making those rolls to get out.
You need a 15 to get out of those rope bindings, and he's like, I have a -2 to strength, so no, it's not happening. It's just unable to do so. But meanwhile, the barbarian can just snap them in an instant and fight everybody. And I thought that. Honestly, out of all the people involved, Michelle Rodriguez did the best job of defining what I expect a barbarian to look and feel like.
Yeah, really leaned in. Her character really leaned into the unarmed combat as well to really show off the strength. It wasn't just swinging weapons around. I really enjoyed the stunts. It felt like there was a lot of great choreography in terms of the way they use the world around them to like smash with like different objects, throwing people, like a lot of judo throws. Like it really felt like, yeah, like I just imagined a very unarmed combat centric barbarian just raging through this group of unknown soldiers.
There was an element to that too, where you're thinking about the dumb barbarian, right? The unintelligence. There was this time where they were talking about the wild shape, and she was like, a deer. And we're like, why would there be a deer in the middle of the city? And it just leaned into when there actually was a deer in the middle of the city.
I think what's so important about that, though, is Holga the Barbarian isn't stupid. She just, like, when you think of the barbarian dumping their instat, I think that she showed us the proper way to play that, where she kind of says what's on her mind, and it's not always the right thing. She throws a few ideas out there while they're making plans. She'll be like, why don't we do this? And everybody's like, no. And like she has that one quip where I think it was the deer, and Edgin's like, why would there be a deer in Neverwinter? And she's like, don't judge me, or like something like that. And it was just that moment where like she knows her ideas aren't the best, but she's going to say them anyway, and that's fine. And I think that she really did a good job of like not being stupid, but being like, intelligence is her lowest stat, but she still has wisdom, she still has charisma, a little bit higher. She's got a lot of strength, and she doesn't come off like, I don't know. Like, she doesn't come off as dumb. She just comes off as like, she throws a few things out there that you're like, barbarians, you did it right.
I mean, the intellect devour did walk past all 5 of the characters.
No character was an intelligence-based character.
We had a sorcerer, a bard, a paladin, a barbarian, and a druid. In our
no
main,
intelligence.
No intelligence-based characters.
Which, again, is a bending of the rules, because intellect devourers actually love low intelligence characters.
The higher intelligence you have, actually, the more able you're able to resist them, despite the fact that, I think in the lore, they prefer eating.
Okay, so we're going with lore over rules.
Yeah.
Where did you land on Chris Pine's character, Edwin? You said bard, but I think both of you made great points that it might be something else.
He doesn't cast any spells in the entire movie, and he sneak attacks people with a lute. He's more of a rogue than anything.
This is actually my first gripe, and again, as we get into gripes, I do want to say that like my gripes do not take away from the fact that the movie was highly enjoyable. That being said, Edgin is not a bard by the traditional sense, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that this movie goes out of its way in so many instances to stick to D&D, to show us what D&D is. That choosing for Edgin to not be a spellcaster seems like an interesting choice to me, because so many other elements of the movie are like, the sorcerer with these spells, the barbarian with her rage, and...
But she never said, I'm going to rage. She
you don't
She
say
wasn't
that.
really in an angry rage in any case either.
In the alleyway fight, there's one small clip, and I was waiting for it. She starts fighting, somebody throws her against the wall, and it's just a close-up of Michelle Rodriguez going like, bah! And I was like, there it is.
You can see it turn on.
Yeah, she yells, she like lets out a roar and then beats everybody up. And I was like, that's the rage. But I hear you. But Edgin, no spellcasting, and that is, bards are full spellcasters. He uses cunning action, he uses sneak attack, and he's a skills guy. I would say that he's a bard, or he's a rogue who's proficient in performance and knows how to handle a lute.
Very charismatic, though, right?
Very
He
charismatic,
definitely has that charisma, and does lean in when, after the scene with the halfling, where he starts kind of inspiring a little bit. So in a sense, maybe inspiring leader, maybe bardish.
It's just, I was actually waiting the whole movie for him to strum on the lute and something magical to happen, and him to be like, oh, like I thought maybe he would discover that he's magical, but it never happens. And I was like, okay,
I think that might have been confusing, though, for a non-D&D audience, because bardic magic, as it is one of those very wishy-washy, not well explained exactly where it comes from in terms of origins. And we see a lot of incongruities in the whole movie, because we see characters like Justice Smith's character Simon pulls off reverse gravity with a wild magic, and we have time stop and meteor swarms being thrown around, and Sophia Lillis is a very proficient druid in that she can turn into a owlbear. We don't see her cast any spells either.
True, she's just wild shape.
She just, yeah, exactly. And so I would be cautious about trying to overanalyze the movie and shackle it directly to the rules, because movies need that level of cinematic freedom to do what's interesting. And again, I think it's overall because it wisely chose not to explain how magic works.
Yeah.
I think that was a very, very smart decision. And while the characters in the world seem to have a general awareness of like, oh, we need a druid, or oh, you're a sorcerer, or this person is a wizard, the lines were a little bit less clear for everything else, which I think is endemic to fantasy in general. Like, not every fantasy story is going to fall perfectly into the way D&D does it, and even the D&D-isms, you actually see that they actually don't translate well outside of the medium of a game.
Yeah. Probably the weakest part of the movie for me, which, again, super fun start to finish, but I walked away feeling like characters who, by all accounts, could have and should have been my favorite characters. I'm just going to name it. Doric the Druid had the fixings to be my favorite character. I loved everything that was going on with Doric's character, but by the end of the movie, Doric didn't get a single sort of moment other than her initial appearance where she says, "Here is why I will join the party. Here are my reasons. Forest is being destroyed. I don't like what's going on here. So yeah, I'm with you guys." From that point forward, she never has another emotional moment through the entire film, and I never learn anything else about her. I even feel like Simon, who even gets a little bit more, still was left as sort of a joke character, and he joins them because they're his friends and he has nothing better to do. But I feel like, where was my moment for Doric or Simon that made me care about them?
Well, I think that that extends as well of the connections between all the characters were pretty weak in general. I did not understand at all how Holga came into Ed's life. And there was an establishment that they had a long-standing relationship as effectively Holga being the adoptive mother to Edgin's daughter. But I almost thought that I'd missed a line that said that Holga was actually somehow a relation. Like, if they had have said that Holga was Edgin's wife's sister or cousin or somehow related, and that she had come in to help raise that child, I would have, like, that would have been like, okay, I get it. And so it felt like every character was just one line away from being better explained in their relations and connections to one another. And so despite the movie having a great deal of heart, especially that campfire scene where they were about to just give up, I was like, I actually don't understand. Regé-Jean Page just walked away. I don't understand why Sophia Lillis isn't just walking away here either. And so it kind of stretched that connection there, and I felt that just a little bit more thought in the structure of the film as to how all the characters were brought in to one another and how their relationships overlapped with each other, and given them all a little bit more of a reason to stick together. Because, again, the comparison with Guardians of the Galaxy is the Guardians of the Galaxy, at the beginning, they all wanted the orb, and they all got arrested, and they all broke out of prison together, and they were all kind of following on. There was a thing that brought them all together, and the film needed one other catalyst to bring them all together, that like a shared experience. And they all kind of, the characters didn't have that shared experience. It was all kind of like, will you help us? And they didn't even meet each other in a tavern. Like, I almost would have bought, like, with the way some of the characters were introduced, they literally could have met in a tavern, and I would have bought that more than what we got.
Well, there is an element of, when you bring a ragtag group together, a lot of D&D campaigns start that way. And there was an element of a common enemy, but not strong enough to kind of bring them through and kind of follow through on that, in my opinion.
Yeah, because it had a very personal objective in that the devilry, like the evil of the Red Wizards, was not really known to any of the characters until the final act of the movie. Like the conspiracy of the Red Wizards was very well concealed the entire time, and so it was a personal thing, and it was a personal thing that also the stakes didn't feel immediate despite them feeling personal. Right? You understood why the stakes were personal and high for Edgin.
Yeah.
But everyone else is kind of like, what are we in here for?
You know, it really tries to sell itself as like this heist movie, but I never really got a heist movie vibe. And I definitely got adventure vibes, and there's comedy vibes, but I never really felt like at some points I forgot that they were after gold, like they, you know, just because there was other things going on that were sort of driving things forward. And maybe this is just like me, you know, me thinking back on it, I didn't get like the classic heist movie feeling. And I think that was what sort of was the reason. Like Simon wanted money because he was poor. They wanted to get back at Forge after they discovered his treachery. So like 3 of them were in it for money, and one of them they sort of convinced Sophia to like come along because, you know, while they steal money, they get back at the person that's taking away her forest. But then like I think it was sort of like these fighting, like we knew that there was a bad evil guy. They wanted the money, but I never felt like it was clear as the viewer which one I was sort of a part of. And I'm no movie critic, but I found it, I think I would have loved to see them lean in a little bit more. And there is that thing that I think D&D does really well, is at a table, you can create those personal connections. And when you do that, you have like, everything means so much more. And so I do agree with you in the sense that there's some missing moments of like I think the whole thing was that she walked into the bar when Edwin was drunk with the baby, and she's like, I have to take care of this baby. And you're like, but that's definitely a session 1 of people that have never met before are like, so how do you guys know each other? I looked after his baby when he was drunk.
But then her timeline doesn't make any sense either, because when did she was imprisoned, she left her husband, she was banished from her tribe, but then she also spent like, again, Kira, by the time we meet her in the film, is not a baby anymore. She's a teenager.
Yeah, so there's like 10, 11 years of her. And
so where does Hoga's timeline actually line up with everything? I mean, I'm guilty of this in my own campaigns. Like, don't question my but it was one of those things where watching the film, it was like, okay, I buy that. Okay, buy that. It was only like now thinking about it, it's like, what's the timeline here?
And again, maybe I have to go watch it again and again.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a movie I will watch again. But I would have loved to have more. Like, there was those heist moments of like, we need to do this thing. Well, we need this thing to do this thing. Well, now we need to do this thing to do this thing to do this thing. And so it's sort of like the build up, right? Mm-hmm. And the struggles and having to overcome challenges when you can't get the helm, or you can't, you need to find the location of the helm. And so you have those great moments. It all happened very quickly, and maybe that was for a good thing. Maybe there was a good reason why that happened, because the focus was supposed to be on the terrible, evil Red Wizards. But if you go in thinking it's a heist movie, I never got that. I never left with that.
One thing that I realized was a strength of the movie was their ability to take us through so many different locations very quickly because of the way they did a good job of being like, we need the helmet. Well, where do we find the helmet? Well, it was found in this battle. Okay, well, we have to go to the graveyard of that battle and do the amazing scene where they do the Speak with Dead, which was great. But then they find out that helmet was in the hands of the Paladin, which is how we introduced that character, and then that brings them into the Underdark, which then brings them to Thumbershout. So like this string of events is actually really well thought out. And in D&D campaigns, you kind of get that similar thing where it's like, go from this cool location to this cool location, and you ended up getting all of these places that visually and they were visually striking. They had cool moments, and they had a lot of appropriate gags involved with each of those set pieces. You got the Intellect Devourers walking by them. You got the Thumbershout Chonky Boy battle. You get the Speak with Dad. You get their like cool escape from Thumbershode, which was also pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Very much creative thinking on the player's standpoint, which is another one with some of the magic items. I thought they used them in creative ways, which is something that also happens at D&D tables all the time.
Prestidigitation was one of the most beautifully used spells
Yes.
in the whole movie.
That said, though, despite I felt the cast was excellent. They were wonderful. They did not have anywhere near the chemistry that the cast of Guardians of the Galaxy had, or the cast of, say, Princess Bride, right? Like, thinking of both of those other two movies, like the connection, the interplay, the wonderful relationships that blossomed really between the like I guess I'm really biased because like Princess Bride is pretty hard to beat as a film, and it stands up.
Which is funny because Princess Bride isn't the best acted.
No, it isn't.
Isn't
It's
the best
very
anything.
campy, and it was very much panned at its release. But as a film that like nails the story beats and like where it all comes together, it really holds up. Like, I mean, for me, Princess Bride is one of those movies that it is just aged like a fine wine. Like it just gets better. It's one of those movies. Every time I watch it, I find more things to enjoy about it, and certainly Guardians of the Galaxy has every time I watch it, there's more things that I enjoy about it. And we'll see with this one. Like, the storyline didn't inspire me. The storyline didn't make me think of things. Like, I love the arena. It was probably one of the coolest, like, arena set pieces that you could have in a high magic fantasy setting, right? The dungeon crawl was super cool. The heist, the part that was the heist was well done. Yeah. But overall, like, I wanted to care more about the characters and their relationships to one another than I did. And I got there by the end, but it took a cheap shot of killing but then not killing Michelle Rodriguez to do it.
And that we didn't even see. I never saw her get hit.
Well, like, fortunately, they'd established everything because they said a red wizard's blade does it. But, like, I didn't see her get stabbed by the blade. It was like, here she is, like, all of a sudden. Like, it almost felt like the DM being like, oh, but you looked down and you actually were stabbed. And then now you have to use the token. And, of course, he did.
I was thinking that, like, again, super predictable. When it got to that moment, I was like, yes. But I still actually got really emotional for some reason as Michelle Rodriguez was like, I don't want to, like, this sucks. She didn't say that, but... and
she was willing to die.
Yeah, but the way that I ended up, suddenly this, like, again, the D&D lens popped into my head as I was watching it. I was like, I saw this coming. And then I was like, for the player playing Edgin, who at the outset of the campaign said, my goal is to get this resurrection tablet to resurrect my dead wife. That is my character backstory. You play through the whole campaign. The other player at the table gets stabbed with this blade that is cursed, and he's standing there with the tablet, and I'm like, yes, this is predictable and cliche, but if you slapped that in front of the player playing Edgin and said, here we are at the end of the campaign, bud, are you going to use the tablet to do what you set out to do from the beginning, or is there going to be a growth in your character and a realization? And in that moment, I went, oh, this is actually brilliant, and I love this.
It did get there, and especially with Chris Pine having the scene where, like, he admits to being a bad father and saying, I was trying to bring back my wife, not your mother. And then he did ultimately bring back Kira's mother, because in truth, Holga was Kira's mother, right? And I think that the odd thing about the film was that didn't become... like, the film didn't reinforce that until later in the movie. Mm-hmm. And I felt that if the film had have established a little bit more strongly in the beginning that was the relationship, I think that it would have made it would have really clarified a lot between those whole things. And that's where I wondered, like, yeah, if I was just doing that little bit of a rewrite, it might have been like, oh yeah, she's an aunt or a family member or a cousin, or just like build that family connection that explains why she was there, why she came along. And then I would have been like, yep, family. And for like, straight up, I find this in our own D&D games, like, family is the secret. And there was like to making like a really good story, right? Bring in more family connections. And I feel like the movie could have reinforced that a little bit more.
I do think, though, there were elements of it where it was almost Easter egged in, because she references her necklace that Holga gave her. She references when she first see her, she goes past her father right to Holga. There is this element that they do bring in the pieces of their connection, but they bring it right together at the end. Yeah. But you're right. I think there could have been a stronger, even bigger pieces without just like hinting at it, bringing in those full pieces to really say she is like her mother.
Yeah. The parts were on the table. Everything was there. It just needed like one or two more lines of dialogue earlier on that would have like cemented it into place.
The gripes aside, I do hope that we actually do get a franchise out of this. And I hope that in the future, if there was another movie, I could see a possibility where Doric and Simon become more prominent characters. Because after all this, there's a chance that Holga and Edgin step down and just worry about raising the daughter.
I want more from all of them, and I think it would be really cool that they implied that the daughter, she came in at the end. She was part of the final thing. And
fair.
I really like the idea of all of them being involved in this together.
But I could see a movie where it starts with Doric or Simon needing to get the group back together, and then they have to go and get the group back together, and they become give them the spotlight for a change. Bring our paladin back, because he was amazing, and I feel like he was the character, he was the player who joined the game and was like, oh yeah, I got this really cool character. And
the DM figures out a way to integrate them in everything.
And then he's like, guys, this scheduling isn't working out for me. I'm out, sorry. And then he's, for the closing few sessions, he pops back in to like do a couple things. But I think it was a really enjoyable movie, and I think I want to give it like an 8 out of 10. That's where I'm sitting.
Okay.
What about you guys?
I think what I really love, just kind of bringing it all together, is that this is a movie that's approachable whether you're a D&D player or not. I think there were many elements of Dungeons & Dragons that we enjoyed as players, but at the same time, this is so inviting to bring anyone in, especially if this is your first time like delving into the world of D&D.
I think they did a really great job of being creative with things like magic items, and they, like Monty said, they didn't explain a lot of things, but they built a world that, and then they played with it, which is something that happens on a lot of tables. And it's really easy to read the description on an item, but then it's how your players use it. And I think they did that over and over again, kind of, really treating it like Play-Doh and sort of just making it work to their use, and in some cases overusing certain items, which I thought was hilarious. So I think, overall, great movie. I definitely need to watch it again. I'm sure there's lots of stuff I missed, and I'm excited to see it again.
I had a lot of fun watching this movie with my adventuring party. It was a really wonderful night out, and it was a great movie to share with others in that respect. And so it's absolutely worth going to see. It's a great way to show your friends that might be kind of interested in D&D what the vibe of a D&D game can be like. And so in that respect, I think it's a great success. And once again, I'm not going to give it a hard numerical rating. I'm going to say that, once again, I felt the spirit of some of my favorite movies in this film, like Princess Bride, like Guardians of the Galaxy. It doesn't quite rise to the level of those films, but I still very much would place it in the equivalent of like the better Marvel films. And so that's my final word on it. I think it's and in that respect, it's way more than what I was expecting, which I'm thrilled about. Right? Like my expectations were low, and I was very pleasantly surprised by this film. So it's absolutely worth seeing again, and a worthy entry, a worthy celebration of the hobby. And I will say, like, just as a closing point, it was cool to feel seen. Like, this movie celebrated D&D. And I think that was another like really positive thing of a fan of role-playing games, of a fan of Dungeons and Dragons. This movie wasn't embarrassed about the fact that it was based on Dungeons and Dragons. And it wasn't trying to apologize. Like, sometimes you see a video game movie that is kind of apologizing for the fact that it's based on a video game. Or you see those films that are trying to make it serious or fix the things that are problems with it. This movie didn't feel the need to do that. It was like, we're just going to tell a wonderful story that captures a true spirit, and it did capture that true spirit, and that I think is the highest praise that I can offer. I feel like the spirit of Dungeons and Dragons is in this film.
So if you've seen the movie and you want to share your opinions with us, please let us know them in the comments below.
And please, though, with your comments, be respectful of those who haven't seen the movie yet, and put spoiler warnings in any of your comments before you do so. I also want to say thank you to Jill and Joe for joining us on this very special episode.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. It was really exciting to talk about something we're all passionate about.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Check out more videos by Kelly and Monty right up here.
And if you want to see more of Jill and I, come watch our live stream where we play the Drakkenheim campaign. There's a lot to check out, so check it out up here, just above my right shoulder.
Thank you to all our patrons for all of your support. And if you'd like to support us, you can follow the links below.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.